A good starting definition of a crowd, the definition that most people would readily accept, is a large gathering of people, all of whom have the same direction or specific focus. So think Black Friday sale, where all the customers have a laser focus on getting a great deal, whatever that is. They are there in the store at some crazy hour of the morning because they all believe the same thing. They all have the same intent, and they all have the same desire. And it's a very specific desire. And there is a noticeable urgency about their actions. So crowds have direction, they have motion, and they have intent. As soon as their intent is satisfied, or as soon as their collective desire evaporates, then that crowd will seem to disperse. But it can be reactivated. As you know, crowds have no intellect, they are not picky. Anyone that looks vaguely human can join in. Crowds do not usually reveal anything about us as human beings we would take pride in, although in rare circumstances they can do. There are obviously animal gatherings of tremendous size, huge crowds, and those occur at particular times of year for important biological purposes like mating and child-rearing. There is a simple evolutionary reason for those gatherings. The great mass of animals all gathered together deters predation. So for example, if a penguin tried to rear a chick alone, there would be no chance for that chick. It clearly has a much stronger chance when there are thousands of chicks being reared together, with thousands of adults creating a sort of living wall of protection around them. Similarly, a herd of zebra, or zebra as Americans say, gather because the more zebra there are together, hiding behind their moving, living mass of difficult-to-see bodies, the more difficult it is for predators such as lions to spot and mark their prey and single one out. So this is true, I expect, even in human society. If you study the Great Qingyun, the spring festival season in China, which is the largest migration of human beings on Earth, you can see that the purpose of the event was to allow for biological imperatives to progress, even in a society rigidly controlled and deeply mired in fascism, to the extent that the urgent work of the individual has to be camouflaged from the authorities, to get home, to have some peace, family, rest, take a break from work. If everyone travels together at the same time, then the authorities only see that great mass in motion, not an individual or a random motion which needs to be checked or stopped. The thing which is probably decisive about human crowds, which makes them different from animals, is that in our natural history we have very rarely, if ever as a species, been in the situation where we could manifest a crowd. There just have never been enough of us up until quite recently, so say the last 5,000 years, that could make that happen. So that means we're mostly ignorant about what crowds are and what they do. Instead, human beings are pack animals. We have always lived in packs or small clans like chimpanzees or capuchin monkeys do. We have millions of years of experience there. If you think about it, humans have a lot in common with dogs, who are also pack animals, and perhaps this is why we get along so well together as species. Small packs are where human evolution came into play, literally giving our species mastery. It was the hunting pack, the small band of men working together to bring down an animal many times their size, like a woolly mammoth, through persistence hunting that made effective use of standing on two legs. The legs evolved because walking uses less energy than crawling or locomotion on four limbs, but it was only due to persistence hunting that humans gained a decisive advantage over their prey, and this allowed them to continue and expand as a species, to get mastery of the world, really. The pack structure is very much at the heart of the human experience. Almost every city in the world today is riddled with packs, We normally call them gangs. And these spontaneously assemble in response to economic and environmental pressures found in the desert of the real we call a large city. Wherever the more complex hegemony of the 21st century crowd fails, the pack emerges as the natural response to that. Still persistence hunting, but just a different game on a different playing field. The great book on crowds is Elias Canetti's 1960 Crowds and Power. This book is a must-read, not because Canetti won the Nobel Prize for Literature, or because it is written in an unforgettable style, or because it has a thought-provoking premise, but because it deals at heart with the problem of totalitarianism, which is very much of the moment. That word and also the name of the leader of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany are never mentioned in the book, but every page is a searing indictment of what happens when people lose their way and become part of the megalomaniacal fantasy of a dictator. Its precursor, in an odd way, is Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, a book by Charles MacKay, which was first published in 1841. It's a book that's still in print largely because of what it has to say about economic bubbles. You see, people have long memories for signals about money and how to make it. The journey from MacKay's book, which reflects a 19th century sensibility, to Canetti is a trek from a more naturalistic world where people still ride horses and believe in manifest destiny into and through a mechanized death chamber world where war takes the form of poison gas, nuclear bombs, and internment camps. So Canetti is dealing with the much more intense problems of the 20th century, even as he probes the deepest depths of prehistory to find the answers. He's my kind of guy. Right now we have an urgent need to understand crowds and the power they engender, because much of what is going wrong in the human world originates in crowd phenomena. Even though that might not be so obvious at this point, crowds are at the heart of what we call mass media. That is, crowds are the targets of news signals, not individuals. And crowd behavior decides the results of elections and installs governments into power. Democracy is a crowd function. To learn more about that, you will have to watch the next segment of Define Your Terms. Please subscribe to my channel. It's the YouTube way. Thanks.
We started down the road towards town, and in the silence, my mind began to rework Ray's words that day with Kurt. All the discussions we'd had before that, the events of that night. And by the time I had dropped my friends off, I had begun to see a new map of the world, one that was frightening in its simplicity, suffocating in its implications. We were always playing on the white man's court, Ray had told me, by the white man's rules. If the principal, or the coach, or a teacher, or Kurt wanted to spit in your face, he could, because he had power and you did not. If he decided not to, if he treated you like a man or came to your defense, it was because he knew that the words you spoke, the clothes you wore, the books that you read, your ambitions and desires were already his. Whatever he decided to do, it was his decision to make, not yours, and because of that fundamental power he held over you, because it preceded and would outlast his individual motives and inclinations, any distinction between good and bad whites held negligible meaning. In fact, you couldn't even be sure that everything you had assumed to be an expression of your black unfettered self, the humor, the song, the behind-the-back pass, had been freely chosen by you. At best, these things were a refuge. At worst, a trap. Following this maddening logic, the only thing you could choose as your own was withdrawal into a smaller and smaller coil of rage, until being black meant only the knowledge of your own powerlessness and your own defeat. And the final irony, should you refuse this defeat and lash out at your captors, they would have a name for that too, a name that could cage you just as good, like paranoid, or militant, or violent, or nigger.